The story is titled, "My Wife Cheated with Her Boss and My Daughters Helped Hide It, So I Took My Nuclear Revenge." Hello, everyone. I dedicate a lot of time to finding these stories for you, so if you enjoy the content, please consider subscribing. It means so much to me and helps keep this journey going strong. Let's grow together. Now, let's dive in. The original poster begins. I'm not sure why I'm writing this. Maybe I need to vent, or maybe it's to make sense of it all, because right now, my life feels like it's been torn to pieces, and I'm barely holding it together. I just need to tell someone, even if it's strangers on the internet. For nearly 30 years, I thought I had the kind of life most people dream about. I married my wife, Jane, when we were both young. She was 20, and I was 22. We had nothing. We were completely broke. We were happy. Together we built a life from scratch and raised 2 daughters, Alice and Maddie, who became my everything, my pride and joy. Alice, my oldest, is 26 now. She has always been the high achiever, valedictorian in high school, top of her class in college, and she's now planning to marry her long-term boyfriend this fall. Maddie, my youngest at 24, has always been more easygoing. She's sweet, quick to smile, and we've had a close bond since she was little. I always believed I had a strong relationship with both of them. Jane and I had what I thought was a good marriage. Of course, like any couple, we had our challenges, financial difficulties when the kids were younger, some arguments, even health scares, but through everything, I thought we were a team. I believed we would grow old together, becoming that elderly couple sitting on a porch, laughing about the crazy things we'd done in our youth. I loved her with everything I had. Then, last week, my entire world fell apart. It was just a regular weekday. Jane told me she was going out for dinner with Alice and Maddie. They did this often. Every couple of weeks they would have what they called a girls' dinner. It was their time to catch up, laugh, and share things they didn't want to discuss with me. I never minded. In fact, I felt proud that they were so close. It made me feel like I had done something right as a husband and father. That evening, Jane was upstairs getting ready, while I was downstairs in the kitchen, sipping coffee and scrolling through the news on my phone. It was from an unsaved number. "Can't wait to see you tonight." I froze. My first reaction was confusion. Surely this was a mistake. Or maybe it wasn't what it looked like. I stared at the message, my mind racing, before finally tapping on the conversation to see the rest of the messages. What I found devastated me. The messages weren't long, but they didn't need to be. They were from her boss, and they were meeting for dinner. It was painfully clear this wasn't a business meeting. The tone of the text was flirtatious and affectionate. One read, "I miss you. Once a week isn't enough." Jane had replied, "I miss you too." My stomach churned, and my heart raced. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. This was my wife, the woman I'd built a life with, the mother of my children, having an affair. I didn't know what to do. A part of me wanted to storm upstairs and confront her immediately, but I was in shock, trying to process what I'd just seen. I felt like I needed more evidence to be absolutely certain. A few minutes later, Jane came downstairs, looking stunning as always. She smiled at me, kissed my cheek, and said, "Don't wait up, okay?" Her voice was warm, casual, like nothing was wrong. Somehow I managed to reply, "Have fun with the girls." After she left, I picked up her phone and enabled location sharing. I'd never done anything like this before. But at that moment, I didn't care. I needed to know the truth. I sat in the kitchen staring at my phone, waiting for her location to update. When it finally did, my heart sank. She wasn't heading to the usual restaurant where she and the girls met. Instead, she was going somewhere else, a place we'd visited many times as a family. I texted Alice and Maddie, asking, "What time are you meeting Mom for dinner?" Both replied quickly. Alice said she would meet her at her house. Maddie's response was similar. They were lying. My own daughters were lying to me. I didn't want to believe it, but I knew at that moment that Jane wasn't the only one betraying me. My daughters were part of it too. I waited, watching Jane's location on my phone. When she arrived at the restaurant, I grabbed my car keys and drove there, my heart pounding. When I got there, I parked outside and looked through the window. It didn't take long to spot her. She was sitting at a table near the back with her boss. They were holding hands, laughing, completely unaware that I was watching them. It felt like a knife had been driven into my chest. I pulled out my phone and took a picture of them. I wasn't even sure why, maybe to prove to myself that this was real and not some awful dream. Afterward, I drove away. I parked my car in an empty lot and stared at the picture on my phone. A flood of emotions, anger, heartbreak, disbelief, rushed over me. I didn't know how to confront her or what to say. Instead, I opened our family group chat and sent the picture with a simple caption, "Glad you're enjoying girls' dinner." Then, I turned off my phone and drove to my brother's house. I wasn't ready to face the fallout yet. That night, I lay awake in my brother's guest room, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of how everything had fallen apart so quickly. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, my family, felt like a lie. I didn't go home that night. After sending that photo and turning off my phone, I drove aimlessly until I ended up at my brother's house. It was late, but he let me in without asking too many questions. He could see something was wrong. It must have been written all over my face. I didn't tell him the full story then. I just said I needed a place to stay. He offered me a beer, but I wasn't in the mood. All I wanted was to be alone. I spent the night on his couch, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. My thoughts were racing as I tried to come to terms with everything that had unfolded over the past few hours. I couldn't stop replaying the scene in my head, seeing Jane with her boss at the restaurant, the way she smiled at him, how they leaned in close, holding hands like teenagers in love. It made me feel physically ill. How long had this been going on? How could I have been so blind to it? And then there was Alice and Maddie. The way they had lied to me so easily, like it meant nothing. I had raised them to value honesty and integrity, and now they were helping their mother hide an affair? This betrayal hit me on an entirely different level. The following morning, I turned my phone back on. Instantly, it lit up with notifications, texts, missed calls, and voicemails. Jane had called me dozens of times, and both Alice and Maddie had sent multiple messages. I didn't have the energy to go through everything, so I skimmed them. Jane's messages were as expected. "Please call me. I can explain. It's not what you think. We need to talk." I couldn't bring myself to listen to her voicemails. Hearing her voice would have only fueled my anger. Maddie's messages, however, struck a different chord. She had sent me wall after wall of text, filled with apologies. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I never should have lied to you. I hate myself for what I did. Please don't hate me. Can we please talk? I'm terrified. I've ruined everything." Even her boyfriend messaged me, saying, "Hi, this is Josh. Maddie is really upset and having a panic attack. She's scared you'll never forgive her. Please call her." But I didn't reply. I didn't know what to say. Alice's message, on the other hand, was completely different. It was short and cold. "Dad, I'm sorry you found out this way, but I think you're overreacting. Don't throw away a good marriage over one mistake." Overreacting? One mistake? My blood boiled. This wasn't a simple mistake. It was a profound betrayal, not just by Jane, but by Alice and Maddie too. They had lied to me and actively helped their mother cover up an affair that had completely shattered our family. I couldn't stop thinking about all the times they must have lied directly to my face. Every time I asked about their plans, and they pretended everything was normal while knowing exactly what Jane was doing. I spent the day consumed by anger and heartbreak, unable to focus on anything else. My brother tried to talk to me, but I wasn't ready to share what had happened. I needed more time to process everything. By the afternoon, I decided I couldn't stay silent anymore. I started by texting Maddie. I kept it brief. "Maddie, I love you, but what you've done has hurt me deeply. I need some space to figure things out." Her reply came almost immediately. "I'm so sorry, Dad. I'll never forgive myself for this. I love you so much." I didn't respond. Next, I messaged Alice. "Alice, this isn't a mistake. This is a betrayal by my entire family. Please don't contact me until I'm ready to talk." She didn't reply, but I was sure she had shown Jane, because shortly after, Jane started texting me again. Her messages read, "Don't take this out on the girls. They were just trying to protect me. They didn't mean to hurt you." I ignored her. I wasn't interested in hearing her excuses. Later that evening, I finally opened up to my brother. I told him everything. Showed him the messages, the picture I had taken of Jane with her boss, and the family group chat post I had sent before turning off my phone. His reaction was exactly what I expected. He was furious on my behalf. "You need to cut them all off. They clearly don't respect you, so why should you keep them in your life?" His words hit hard, because deep down, I knew he was right. But cutting ties with my daughters? That was something I wasn't sure I could do. That night, I began to consider my next steps. I knew my marriage to Jane was over. There was no salvaging it, and I didn't want to try. But Alice and Maddie? Could I ever trust them again? Could I ever look at them the same way, knowing what they had done? I decided I needed time to think, to process, and to figure out how to move forward. One thing was certain, though. The life I had known was gone. The fallout wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a slow, suffocating burn. By the time I got back to my brother's place that evening, the anger I had felt earlier was gone. In its place was a heavy, crushing numbness. It felt like the solid foundation of my life had crumbled, and all I could do was watch. When I turned my phone on again, there was silence. Earlier, there had been frantic calls and texts, but now there was nothing. No more apologies from Maddie, no follow-ups from Alice, and no additional messages from Jane. Maybe they had realized I wasn't going to respond and decided to back off. Or perhaps they were regrouping. Either way, the quiet felt unsettling. The silence gave me too much time to think, which wasn't a good thing. Without the anger, all that remained was the pain. My thoughts spiraled. How long had this been happening? How many times had Jane lied to my face? Did Alice and Maddie feel guilty about what they had done, or was it normal to them to betray their father to protect their mother? That evening, I sat with my brother and laid everything out for him. He didn't interrupt. He just listened as I explained about the texts on Jane's phone, the lies from Alice and Maddie, the picture I had taken of Jane and her boss, and the group chat message I had sent before leaving. When I finished, he leaned back and shook his head. "That's messed up. I don't even know where to start. I always thought Jane seemed a little too perfect, but I didn't think she'd do something like this. And the girls, man, that's just low." Hearing someone else validate my feelings was oddly comforting. It confirmed I wasn't overreacting or imagining things. But his anger couldn't fix anything. What I needed was clarity, a way forward, and I still didn't have it. The next morning, I decided to stop wallowing and stop taking action. The first thing I focused on was securing my finances. I couldn't deal with the emotional fallout without protecting myself first. I spent the day canceling joint accounts, transferring money into a private account Jane couldn't access, and safeguarding anything that might be at risk during the divorce. I wasn't going to let her use my grief to blindside me. But it wasn't just Jane on my mind. As I went through my accounts, I couldn't stop thinking about the money I had spent, or planned to spend, on Alice's wedding. Tens of thousands of dollars, all for a daughter who had looked me in the eye and lied, a daughter who had helped her mother betray me. The thought made me feel sick. I made a mental note to discuss the wedding expenses with my lawyer. I might not be able to recover the money already spent, but I was determined not to contribute another cent. By the afternoon, I was ready to move forward. I began by contacting several lawyers. My brother had advised me to consult a few before making a decision, so I spent the day recounting my story in various offices to professionals who tried their best to stay composed, but were clearly judging the situation. By the end of the day, I had chosen one. She was sharp, determined, and most importantly, aggressive. I told her I wanted the process to be efficient and decisive, ensuring Jane wouldn't walk away with anything she didn't deserve. She assured me she had handled many similar cases before, which gave me some confidence, though it didn't ease the pain. At least I felt I was in capable hands. That night, as I sat alone in my brother's guest room, I started thinking about what I wanted to say to Jane. I had avoided confronting her so far, partly because I didn't trust myself to stay calm, and partly because I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of justifying herself. What could she possibly say to make any of this acceptable? However, I knew I couldn't avoid her forever. Eventually, I would have to face her, and when that moment came, I wanted to be prepared. I began writing down everything I wanted to say, questions I needed answers to, points I wanted to make, and things I needed her to hear. Whether or not I used it, putting it into words gave me a sense of control, as though I wasn't just a victim in this nightmare. The hardest part was thinking about Alice and Maddie. I hadn't spoken to them since sending those texts, and I wasn't sure if I could. How do you talk to your children after discovering they've been deceiving you for months? How do you even begin to rebuild that trust? I wanted to believe Maddie's apologies were genuine, that she truly regretted what she'd done. But how could I trust her words after what I had uncovered? And Alice, her cold, dismissive response had cut me deeply. I always knew she was closer to Jane, but I never thought she'd side with her mother in something so damaging. It felt like she had chosen Jane over me, and that realization was devastating. That night, I made another decision. I wasn't going to reach out to them. If they wanted to fix this, they would have to come to me. I wouldn't chase after them, begging for explanations or forgiveness. They had made their choices, and now they would have to live with the consequences. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling once again, I felt a strange calm, for the first time since discovering the affair. I wasn't entirely lost anymore. I had a plan. It wasn't perfect and it wouldn't solve everything, but it was a start. I was done being the victim. From now on, I was going to take control. After 2 days of staying at my brother's house, dodging calls and sorting through my emotions, I decided it was time to confront Jane. Avoiding her wouldn't change anything, and there were things I needed to say, things she needed to hear. Late that night, I sent her a message. "We need to talk tomorrow at 10 a.m. at the house." She responded almost immediately, "I'll be there. Please, just let me explain." Explain? What was there to explain? I wasn't interested in excuses or hollow justifications, so I didn't reply. I figured I would save it for the conversation. The next morning, I got up early and drove to our house. The moment I walked in, I was hit with a wave of nostalgia mixed with bitterness. This was our home, the place where we had built a life, raised our daughters, celebrated birthdays, anniversaries, and holidays. Now, it felt empty, as though all the good memories had been tainted. Jane arrived right on time. She stepped inside nervously, her eyes red and swollen as if she had been crying for days. She held her phone tightly in one hand like it was a shield, and I noticed she wasn't wearing her wedding ring. That detail stung more than I expected. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," she said softly, standing awkwardly by the door, as though afraid to come any closer. "Don't thank me," I replied, my voice colder than I intended. "I'm not here to make this easier for you." That set the tone for the conversation. We sat down at the dining room table, the same table where we had shared countless family meals, and she began talking immediately. She said all the things I had anticipated. It wasn't serious. It didn't mean anything. It was a mistake. She repeated herself, cycling through the same phrases as though saying them enough times would make them believable. "Stop," I finally said, cutting her off. "I don't want excuses. I want answers." She looked at me, confused. "What do you mean?" "How long?" I asked. She hesitated before answering. "A few months." Her face crumbled and she whispered, "Almost a year." I clenched my fists under the table, struggling to keep my anger in check. A year. An entire year of deception. How many times had she smiled at me, kissed me, or told me she loved me while sneaking around behind my back? "And the girls?" I asked. "How long have they known?" Jane winced, avoiding my eyes. "Not the whole time. I told them a couple of months ago. I didn't mean to involve them, but you did," I interrupted. "You dragged them into your lies. Do you have any idea what that's done to me?" She broke down into loud sobs. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you. I was just so unhappy." "Unhappy?" I snapped, my voice echoing in the empty house. "You were unhappy, so you decided to destroy our family? You cheated on me, and you involved our daughters in your mess. Do you even realize what you've done, Jane?" She didn't answer. She just cried into her hands. For the first time, I didn't feel any sympathy for her. "You've ruined everything," I said quietly. "Not just our marriage, but my relationship with Alice and Mattie. How am I supposed to trust them after this? How can I look at them and not see their betrayal?" "I didn't want them to lie to you," she whispered. "I didn't want any of this." "Then why did you do it?" I asked. "If you were so unhappy, why didn't you come to me? Why didn't you try to fix things instead of sneaking around?" She had no answer. Or maybe she did, but it didn't matter. Nothing she said would change what she had done. After a long silence, I stood up. "I'm filing for divorce," I said. "You'll hear from my lawyer soon." "Please, don't do this," she begged, standing as well. "We can work through this. We can fix it." "There's nothing to fix," I replied. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine. Before leaving, I turned to her one last time. And don't expect me to pay for Alice's wedding anymore. She can ask your boss to cover it, since you're both so good at keeping secrets. Her face crumpled again, but I didn't stick around to see her reaction. On my way out, I paused in the hallway, staring at the family photos hanging on the wall. There we were, Jane, Alice, Maddie, and me, all smiling like the perfect family. I used to cherish those family photos, but now they felt like a cruel mockery. Grabbing the nearest frame, a picture of us from Alice's high school graduation, I smashed it against the wall. The sound of shattering glass gave me a fleeting moment of satisfaction, but it didn't last. As I walked to my car, a realization hit me. This was only the beginning. The confrontation with Jane was over, but the real struggle was just starting. I still needed to face Alice and Maddie, figure out how to move forward, and accept that the life I had built over nearly 30 years was gone. The talk with Jane was only the first step. It cleared the air, sure, but it didn't make anything easier. If anything, it made the betrayal feel even heavier, more tangible. My anger toward Jane was sharp and clear. I knew what she had done and why I was walking away. But the situation with Alice and Maddie was far more complicated. They were my daughters, my own flesh and blood, but they had chosen her. The day after I told Jane I was filing for divorce, I decided it was time to meet with Alice and Maddie separately. I couldn't avoid them forever, and I wasn't ready to cut them off completely without hearing their perspectives. Still, I knew these weren't going to be easy conversations. The trust between us was shattered, and I needed to know if there was anything left worth salvaging. I started with Maddie. She had always been the more emotional one, and her frantic texts over the past few days reflected that. I asked her to meet me at a park near my brother's house. When she arrived, she looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her eyes were swollen and red, and she kept fidgeting with her hands. As soon as we sat down on a bench, she burst into tears. "Dad, I'm so sorry," she sobbed, her voice cracking. "I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want to hurt you." "Then why did you lie to me?" I asked, keeping my tone steady but firm. "Why did you cover for your mother? Did you think I wouldn't find out?" She shook her head, wiping her eyes. "It wasn't like that," she insisted. "She told me about it a couple of months ago. I was mad at her, but she begged me not to say anything. She said it was just a phase, that she'd end it soon. I didn't know what to do." I stared at her, trying to process her explanation. "So you chose to protect her instead of telling me the truth?" "I thought she was going to stop," Maddie said, her voice barely audible. "I didn't want to destroy the family if there was a chance she'd fix things. I didn't know it would get this far." "That's not good enough, Maddie," I said, my voice firm. "You don't get to excuse what you did by saying you didn't know. You knew she was cheating. You knew she was lying to me, and you went along with it. Do you have any idea how that makes me feel?" She broke down again, and covering her face with her hands, watching her cry stirred a pang of guilt in me, but I couldn't let it soften my resolve. This wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about the trust they had destroyed. "I'm not saying this to punish you," I said after a moment, "but you need to understand how deeply this has hurt me. Right now, I don't know if I can trust you. I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust you the way I used to." Maddie nodded, her shoulders trembling. "I'll do anything to make this right, Dad. Anything. Just tell me what to do." I didn't have an answer for her. All I could say was that I needed time, and then I left. My meeting with Alice was an entirely different experience. I suggested we meet at a coffee shop, thinking a neutral setting might help. She arrived 10 minutes late, looking polished and composed, as if nothing had happened. That alone irritated me. "Thanks for meeting me," she said as she sat down. I didn't waste any time. "Alice, why didn't you tell me about your mother's affair?" She sighed, leaning back in her chair. Dad, I didn't want to get involved. It's between you and Mom. I thought it was better to stay out of it." "Stay out of it?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You didn't stay out of it, Alice. You lied to me. You covered for her. That's not staying out of it. That's choosing a side." "I wasn't choosing sides," she said defensively. "I was trying to keep the peace. I didn't want to make things worse." "Worse for who?" I asked. "For me or for your mother?" Her silence was answer enough. "Alice, you're an adult," I said. "You're about to get married. If your fiancé did to you what your mother did to me, would you want everyone around you to lie and protect him? Or would you want someone to stand up and tell you the truth?" "That's different," she said, looking annoyed. "Mom made a mistake. That doesn't mean you have to throw everything away." Her words hit me like a slap. "A mistake? Is that what you think this is?" "It is a mistake," she said firmly. "People make mistakes, Dad. You don't have to destroy everything over one bad choice." "A bad choice?" I repeated, shaking my head. "Do you even hear yourself? This wasn't just a bad choice. It was a betrayal. By your mother, by you, and by Maddie. And now you're sitting here acting like I'm overreacting?" "I'm not saying that," she said quickly. "I just think you're being too harsh. You're hurt, I get that. But you'll regret cutting us out later. We're your family." "Family doesn't lie to each other," I said, my voice hard. "Family doesn't cover for someone who's tearing everything apart. You and Maddie didn't just lie to me. You broke my trust. And right now, I don't see how I can move past that." She crossed her arms, looking frustrated. "So what, you're just going to disown us? Pretend we don't exist?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But I can't pretend like nothing happened. I can't pretend like you didn't betray me." We sat in tense silence for a few moments before I finally stood up. "I've said what I needed to say," I told her. "The rest is up to you." She didn't try to stop me as I walked out. That night, I sat alone in my brother's guest room, replaying both conversations in my mind. Maddie's remorse seemed genuine, but I wasn't sure if I could ever fully forgive her. Alice, on the other hand, was a different story. Her refusal to acknowledge the gravity of her actions made it clear she didn't think she was at fault. For the first time, I seriously considered cutting them both out of my life. It wasn't a choice I wanted to make, but the thought of rebuilding a relationship with people who had betrayed me so deeply felt impossible. That night, I finalized my decision. The next morning, I called my lawyer and instructed her to update my will. Alice and Maddie were to be removed as beneficiaries. Everything, my savings, retirement fund, and the house, would go to my sister and her children. They had always been there for me, and I knew they wouldn't betray me as my own daughters had. When I told my brother, he didn't try to dissuade me. "You're doing the right thing," he said. "They made their choices. Now they can live with the consequences." The fallout was immediate. Maddie called me the next day, sobbing uncontrollably. "Dad, please don't do this," she begged. "I know I messed up, but I love you. I don't care about the money." Her words, "I just don't want to lose you," struck me more deeply than I had expected, but I remained firm. "Maddie, I'll always love you," I said. "But love doesn't mean I can forget what you did. I need time. Maybe one day we can rebuild what we had, but right now I can't have you in my life." She continued crying, but eventually the call ended. Alice, as expected, handled things differently. She sent me a lengthy email filled with accusations, calling me petty and vindictive. She claimed I was punishing her for trying to maintain peace and that I was ruining her wedding over something that wasn't her fault. I didn't bother responding. It wasn't worth it. Jane also tried to step in. She emailed me in her usual polished, carefully worded tone, pleading with me not to remove the girls from my will. She argued it wasn't fair to punish them for her mistakes, and even had the nerve to suggest that cutting them out would permanently destroy the family. I ignored her too. As the days passed, I noticed a change within myself. While the anger lingered, the crushing weight of betrayal began to ease. Cutting ties with them wasn't easy, but it was something I had to do to protect myself, not just financially, but emotionally as well. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. It's been a month now since I revised my will. I haven't had any contact with Alice or Maddie since. Through mutual friends, I've learned that Alice is scrambling to find the money to cover her wedding expenses, which I had been paying for. I don't feel any sympathy for her. She made her decision when she sided with her mother. As for Maddie, I think about her often. A part of me hopes that someday we might reconcile, but only if she truly grasps the extent of her betrayal. Until that happens, I'm focusing on myself. Jane? She no longer matters to me. I don't care what she does or who she's with. The divorce is proceeding, and my lawyer has assured me she won't walk away with much. That's all I need to hear. Sometimes I question whether I made the right decision by cutting them all out of my life, but then I remind myself of one simple fact. They made their choices, and now I'm making mine. For the first time in a long while, I feel free.